Hey, I'm back. So, this is another impromptu video. So I would encourage you guys, if you enjoy hearing actual social and cultural topics discussed when it comes to the goth scene, but you like well formulated, well spoken, and thought out opinions, I would suggest you check out the Cemetery Confessions podcast. Uh, because when we do that show, I actually take time to prepare something and to plan out a topic and figure out what I'm going to talk about and prepare my voice and prepare the guests and everything. So sorry, my ferrets are going to be super loud, I think. Uh, so yeah, I'm not going to go into the whole why I haven't made a video in so long and excuses like that because I hate that shit when people do it on other YouTube videos. Also, if you're like me and you watch a lot of goth YouTube videos, and I don't do any editing because I don't have the time, and I hate watching videos where people pause and think and they don't get to the point and they're just all over the place. So, if you don't know, there's a little button in the bottom right hand corner where the spindle wheel is. It lets you change the speed at which the video plays. So definitely make use of that if you're like me and don't like this kind of unprofessional rambling. Which, like I said, check out Cemetery Confessions. Much better organized and much more interesting to listen to. So I just wanted to touch on a couple topics. I don't want to go in depth. I just want to probe them, see what kind of comments I get, if any, and then I can take that in a different direction in future videos when I can actually prepare something. So the idea for this came from, came from some conversations I've been having with Angela Benedict, who, if you don't know, is a YouTuber, and you should go check her out. She does a bunch of great videos. So the first thing I want to just kind of throw out there as a discussion topic is materialism. This is one of the kind of hot topics that's been floating around the YouTube sphere. And this idea of goths being too materialistic or having too much of a focus on appearance and nothing else. This is a really complex issue, so I could make a very long video on this, and I don't want to get into it too much. There's a few pieces here that I can kind of break apart, though. The first of which is I just want to dispel this notion that goth is some kind of purely altruistic or purely philosophical or purely intellectual culture. Okay, it's not. It's not purely musical, right? It's not. It's a homology. It's a critical mass of a bunch of different stuff. Now, if you want to argue about which of those is more important, personally, I go for the music, but that's a different video. But this idea that goth can't be materialistic in any way, that you can't talk about what kind of makeup you use, or if you don't buy your clothes from the thrift store and then make your own patches and spend time sewing it all together, like, and then you make a video about what stores you bought clothes from. Like, that's bullshit. While goth is itself an independent subculture, another, again, is something we have talked about at length on the show. I spent a lot of time studying sociology, specifically reading academic papers on goth and alternative cultures. I have a whole PDF library. If anybody's interested, I can maybe send you the link. Maybe, we'll see. But while one of the features of subculture is having some degree of autonomy in its relation to the larger culture, goth itself still is pretty compatible with capitalism. Now, we do have our own markets. We have our own independent shops and those kinds of things. And a lot of people will buy things from thrift stores, but it's very much a consumerist culture. If you want to argue that, that's one of the things we can talk about. So I just kind of want to dispel the notion on the extreme end that there is no materialistic nature to goth. And I'm specifically drinking my beer out of a can, as much as I hate that because I'm a beer snob, just to illustrate this point. On the other end of it, the contention is there's too much of a focus on the visual nature of goth. And this leads to younger goths becoming shallow and vapid and not having a real grasp of what goth culture is. There's a few problems with this and a few good points. So the good points, or the accuracies I see in that argument, are we do have a problem. Now, YouTube, Facebook, social media, they're largely visual mediums. So they kind of reinforce that. Also, I've heard the argument made that people, or YouTubers specifically, will play to what they know. Fair argument. It is frustrating for me when I watch someone talk about something just to talk about it, when they have done no real research or they don't have a grasp on it. I like watching experts talk about something they're experts in. However, I do think there's a problem because I think a lot of goth YouTubers just don't want to take the time or the effort to do the research and understand a topic that they didn't previously have a grasp on, right? I didn't go to school for sociology, and on Cemetery Confessions, we cover a lot of different topics. I don't just sit around and bullshit. I do have different guests on each show that are more of an expert in that area than I am usually. However, I read books. I have a shelf of goth-specific books. I get academic papers. I watch videos. I stay involved in the community. Oh, my computer just froze there for a second. I don't just pull shit out of my ass, right? I take the time and the effort, and it's a lot of time and effort. I have a Patreon page, and I earn all of that money. I spend a lot of time doing research because just to put something out there, to either put the same thing out there over and over, like what I bought this week, to do the same thing like that over and over, or to talk about something that I don't have a real grasp on, I think is not just disingenuous, but I think I'm robbing the listener of something. So on the other side of that argument, though, that see, now I forgot. there are problems with this argument, and I can't remember what it was in the first place. Talking about goth materialism, and let's just move on. Maybe I'll come back to that. So there's another idea out there about what it means to be a role model. I think this is kind of where I was going, actually. The idea that when you have new goths seeing this, it's kind of a straw man, to be honest, but just for the sake of argument, to say they're seeing a bunch of YouTube videos that are only about makeup, they're only about hauls, they're only about outfits of the day, they're only about how to do your hair, that those kids are going to come away with the impression that goth is nothing more than how you look. I think that's a bad argument. First of all, the first premise that that's all there is on YouTube is a straw man, because it's not. But even if we ignore that, there's two contentions I would make to that premise. First of all, I think kids are smarter than you give them credit for. And second of all, if someone is really interested in the goth subculture, this is my opinion, I don't have I mean, I have some anecdotal data, but I haven't sent out ethnographic surveys to kind of collect research data on this specifically. But in my experience, people who are interested in the goth culture that are getting into it, they will watch those videos, but they're not just going to look at YouTube videos. They're not just going to look at Instagram pages. They're not just going to look at Facebook pages that only post photos. They're really going to dig into it. They're going to go, first of all, get involved in their local scene and hang out with people that are older than them to understand what music they're into, what kind of books they read, what their philosophical, ontological, epistemological beliefs are about goth culture. They're going to do a bunch of research. They're going to look at things online. They're going to get books and read books. Those are the people that are serious about the goth scene and really get into it. I think what happens is these kids that we see, or just people that get involved online and have this notion of goth as a purely aesthetic culture, a purely visual expression. We're like that already, and they don't stick around for long. They get into it, whatever kind of frame you want to give it, a year to 5 years, however long, they move on to something else. The thing is, while that person filters out of the culture, or filters at least out of the kind of online presence, that type of person doesn't ever go away. And there's a lot of them. And it's the same. It's not just in goth, it's in anything online. There are people that are just, they're just persistently liminal. They're into just kind of ephemeral phases. They move through different groupings and never really take the time to give serious consideration or do serious research on them. But the problem is there's a lot of them, and there's no break. So you see these people over and over and over. It's part of the reason why specific topics come up kind of cyclically in the discourse of goth, because those people go through phases, and the different complaints come up, and they get argued and debated, and then those people leave. Now, that may or may not be the case. Something we can talk about. The last point is the idea of something else that's come up, of the hive mind. This also stems off that kind of belief that the viewers of goth purely from an online perspective, they don't get involved in a local scene. They don't spend the time to buy a book, even a simple book, or to read a website that kind of chronicles the history of goth. That they latch onto one personality and then follow that personality just every whim. They just think this is what goth is, this one person, and anyone who disagrees or anyone they have a beef with, they just attack. They don't think about it. They don't reason. They don't listen to other opinions. And that's a thing. And I think, again, it's those people that do filter out, but they keep coming in. This is a problem, but not necessarily in the way that some people make it out to be. First of all, to be clear, goth is a dialectical culture. What that means is goth is the people involved in the culture, and this has been true forever since goth started. We talk about, debate, discuss, and argue about goth stuff, right? So if you're having people that are, this is one of the problems I have with the word elitist. People throw out the word elitist for someone that doesn't agree with them. They don't take the time to formulate an argument. They don't take the time to consider someone else's argument. The slightest criticism triggers that person into a defensive mode, and then they try to dismiss somebody else. So, I mean, neurologically, what happens here, I'll just very briefly, because I study neurology in my spare time. Um, what happens is, especially in goth, no, not especially in goth, in everything. But if we want to look specifically at goth, goth culture is implicitly an identity for a lot of people. And so what happens in the brain is the everything surrounding goth gets tied back to that identity. So when someone criticizes, like if I were to say, I think the most goth haircut is a death hawk. And then someone says, you know what? Actually, death hawks aren't the most goth because death hawks came about in the LA death rock scene, and goth music started in Europe, in the UK, with these bands, and this was a more common haircut, right? I don't perceive that as an argument that I can talk about. I perceive it as somebody saying, you're a fucking idiot, you're not a real goth, you're wrong. And so then I just want to react. And that's tied into like the first areas of the brain that evolved. So they're really deep seated, and they're fast trigger parts of the brain. They're low resource consumption. So it's easy to revert to those. Whereas to take the time to separate your identity from the argument and intellectualize it and come back with an actual reasoned argument, whether it's right or wrong, but to have that discussion, that's harder to do because comes from a newly evolved part of the brain, and it takes up more energy, and the brain already takes up a lot of energy. So the brain always is looking for ways to save energy. So if it can stop your frontal cortex from working and just revert to the kind of base emotional anger reaction, it will. That's besides the point. What I really want to get across is that implicit in goth is the dialectical nature, is this discussion of what it means to be goth, what is goth, what goes along with that, how do we know what we know. And it's a culture of people. So it evolves, it changes, it goes in cycles. The same discussions happen, new ideas are had. Certain people that hadn't talked before will meet online and have those discussions. So what I think is important to say is, if someone criticizes you, don't react. Don't internalize it as a personal attack. Try and distance yourself from the idea as an identity and just view it as an idea. And I think that's part of what at least when I first got into goth culture, really excited me, was the intellectual nature of it. And that I could sit around and talk about philosophy. I could sit around and talk about, whatever, Gothic literature, any of these kinds of more intellectual topics, and have a discussion and try and talk about what points we disagreed on. And I think that's part of what makes goth interesting and what makes it fun, because it is fun. There's an element of cattiness. There's an element of drama. But when it goes to the point where people are just angry at each other and they're just shouting and people are separating into different tribes, like we can't have that. So a few ideas about goth materialism, about what it means for younger kids who are new to the culture, what they're seeing, how they're experiencing it, and also how to kind of interact with each other. A lot of stuff. I hope that was coherent. Like I said, check out the most recent episode of Cemetery Confessions was with Adrian, Lygia Resurrected on YouTube. You guys might know her. And we talked about Gothic literature, but we also talked about a bunch of other stuff. It was a really fun episode, a great example of what Cemetery Confessions is. So if you like having these types of discussions in kind of a longer format where you can really kind of dissect everything point by point, check that out. I'll have a link in the show notes, but if you use podcast app, just search for Cemetery Confessions, whether that's in iTunes or whatever podcatcher you use on your phone, or you can go to thebelfry.rip, which is the Belfry Network that I run. There's a bunch of cool podcasts on there, so if you're looking for something else specifically, there's probably a podcast about that. But yeah, Cemetery Confessions. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about this. I apologize if I don't respond in the comments. I like to try and save that energy for videos, and hopefully I'll be doing some more in the future. So thanks for hanging out, and I will see you guys later.